Hello and welcome back to Biology for Beginners. As always, I am your host, Morgan. Now today we're going to be looking at the 5 themes of biology. And I would like to note before we start that these are very broad themes and we're only looking at them at the surface level today. In future lessons, we will dive more into these concepts. But for the purpose of this intro today, we're just looking at surface level introductions to these concepts. The first theme that you're going to see when you study biology is evolution. Evolution is essentially the core theme of the science of biology. It's the idea that there is descent with modification, living species are descended of ancestral species that were different from what we see around us today, and there are genetic changes in a population from generation to generation. You can kind of see these changes when you look at the tree of life, which when you look at this circular example seems kind of crazy because it's depicting almost anything that we see as a living species today. But when you zoom in to one particular branch, like you can see in the more simplified version I have pulled, it's fairly similar to a family tree, where if you look at the little yellow circle I have, that is going to be the most recent common ancestor. For this particular example, you're looking at the most recent common ancestor between giraffes and okapis. If you go back further enough, you can count between how many recent ancestors there were between a giraffe and, say, a sheep. And we will get further into that in a future lesson when we tackle how you read one of these trees and approach understanding the tree of life. Now, the most notable character in this whole evolution idea is generally thought to be Charles Darwin and his book on the origin of species. Charles Darwin in his early years had gone on a 5-year voyage around the world where he looked at plants, animals, and examples from the fossil record, most notably in the Galapagos Islands and his famous finches. He then returned to England after this voyage where he spent 2 decades experimenting, corresponding with his peers, and refining his work prior to the publication of his book. And in this book, he notes his 2 main observations: that there is individual variation in population, so members of one population are a little bit different from one another. They're not all exactly the same. And species can produce more offspring than a habitat can support. So that literally means what it says. A habitat cannot support all the offspring that a species can produce. To repeat that in a bit of a redundant way. And he gained 2 main inferences or assumptions from these observations. One, that there's unequal reproductive success, and that there is an accumulation of favorable traits over time. Now, putting these together, it basically means that organisms that happen to have the traits that make them a little bit better at surviving also mean they're going to reproduce more, and those traits are going to get passed down. Now, the mechanism of evolution is natural selection. And basically what natural selection is it's a process in which individuals with certain inherited traits are more likely to survive and reproduce than individuals that do not have those traits. A very simple diagram of this is in the book on page 11, where we're seeing a population of beetles that have both darker and lighter members on a very dark background. The lighter members of this particular population are more likely to get picked off by the predatory bird, which then results in a population of darker beetles. Now, this in and of itself did not make a new species. It's just showing how a particular trait is more favorable than another. In order for a new species to arise, there needs to be enough time where one population is no longer able to reproduce with another, but defining a species is even more difficult than defining what life is. And this particular mechanism is very supported by the fossil record, observational and experimental data, and also DNA analysis that has been carried out by scientists in recent years. Natural selection can be contrasted with something that humans have been using ever since they started trying to domesticate plants and animals. This particular thing is called artificial selection, and it is the selective breeding of domesticated plants and animals to promote the occurrence of desirable traits. This can especially be seen when you're looking at domesticated animals like dogs, where a couple of the examples I'm giving are very, very different than what their ancestral relative would have been. And also crop plants, which certain traits have been bred for that make them almost alien to their wild ancestral counterparts. The second main theme in biology is that there's a flow of information. And this can be seen first in the flow of genetic information. At its most basic representation, DNA is going to be the code for every single function of the cell, and by extension, the organism as well. And DNA is heritable, meaning it can be passed on from generation to generation. And it is the first thing that is going to be replicated prior to cell division. Now, the A, T, C, and G's that you see in the diagram on the slide are representing nucleotides. Nucleotides are the alphabet that, when strung together in certain orders, code for genes. And genes can be thought of as the blueprints for making proteins. These proteins that genes code for are essential for an organism to function, and specific chains of these nucleotides lead to specific proteins. Now, there's only 4 of them, and they can code for so many different things, but that's not that hard to think about when you think that, at least in the alphabet that we're using here, there are only 26 letters that essentially code for so many different words. And it's important to note here that this genetic code is universal among living things, and it is some of the strongest evidence to support the idea that all living things are related. Now, the other main thing in the flow of information is going to be the flow of signaling information. And this can essentially be broken down to some stimulus is received by a particular receptor. That information is then relayed via the nervous system, hormones, etc., and a specific response is triggered somewhere in the body. And eventually the stimulus will be removed and the relay chain will be broken, which makes that response stop. This can kind of be compared to you coming home and feeling hungry, but you don't want to cook for yourself. So you pick up the phone and dial a pizzeria. That is going to be the stimulus, and the message that is going to be relayed is going to be your order. And the specific response will be that pizza being made and delivered to your home, and that whole chain will be broken once the money has changed hands and your pizza is with you. The third main theme of biology is that the structure or shape of something is almost directly related to the function or what something does. Now, different structures have evolved separately multiple times throughout the history of life. And the basic idea here is that organisms with a structure that best serves the particular function were more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on the genes for that particular structure. This can be seen in wings, especially. The wings of bats, birds, and insects have all evolved completely on their own, but all serve a similar function. The fourth main theme of biology is that energy and matter in the form of chemical nutrients are necessary for organisms to survive, grow, and reproduce. Now, all processes in life require energy, and this energy is going to flow through an ecosystem, starting as light energy from the sun that gets trapped by the primary producers like plants, and eventually leaves that ecosystem as heat. And growth and development will require matter in the form of these chemical nutrients that I mentioned previously. But these nutrients differ from energy in that they cycle within an ecosystem, where these producers that trap energy will also trap nutrients in their chemical form, transform them into something usable. Consumers will get their usable energy and nutrients from these producers, and eventually the decomposers will break down waste and deceased producers and consumers back into those chemical nutrients for later use once again. However, once again noting, energy will leave as heat while those nutrients will cycle. The fifth and final major theme of biology that we will be exploring is the idea that interactions occur at every level of organization in the world of biology and life. Now, different components from different levels of organization are going to make up what is known as a system. And these particular components are going to interact with each other in one way or another, be it a cell producing a particular molecule that is needed in a tissue, or a prey species that is going to be food for a predatory species. And a change at any of these levels will impact the rest of the system. This can be seen in the Arctic food web I have provided in this slide, where if you were to remove a particular component, something else is going to be affected. Now, if you were to remove something like, say, the phytoplankton, which is the base of this food web, the whole thing is going to collapse. And that is going to be the most dramatic example of one part of a system affecting the other components. All right, guys, that's all I have for you for this Biology for Beginners lesson. I do hope that you enjoyed it and you found some sort of value in it. A quick reminder that all the topics we covered today are going to be covered more in depth in future lessons. The idea of this lesson is just a very surface level introduction into some of the main themes of biology as a whole. Remember, if you want my PDF of the PowerPoint shown in this particular video, just pop on over to my Patreon page where that PDF is absolutely free for your download. All right, I will see you guys all next time.
Thank you for watching this video. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you have not already done so. Also remember to follow me on all my social medias. The links are down in the description below, and check out thereptilegoth.com. If you found any value in this and you would like to support the channel, assuming you have the means to do so, go ahead and check out the Patreon. Again, that link is going to be down in the description below, just like everything else. See you next time.